Hi, everyone. It's great that there's some people in the room at the end of the day. Yeah, so this is all about peri-urban farming. And I'm going to give you some information about the Fringe Farming project. And but first, before that, B will give some kind of context to why we want to farm the peri-urban.
Thank you, Aryo. Thank you for coming back to listen to me again. In this session, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about the vision for this decentralized or distributed cropping, which I put forward in the opening plenary. Yes, I'll just quickly skip through this for the benefit of anyone who missed the opening plenary, which is to explain about the origins of the Land Workers Alliance horticulture campaign, which has been running for 5 years. It started in October 2017 and really was partly or majorly inspired by the Food Foundation's Peas Please campaign, which aims to try and get people to eat more fruit and vegetables from a public health angle. And they do this in a number of ways, but one of them is by having these vegetable summits, which are conferences all about trying to get people to eat more vegetables. And they address it from a perspective of very much from the consumer end. So they have retailers pledging to get people to eat more veg, and supermarkets saying they'll put more veg by the tills instead of sweets, and caterers saying they'll serve more portions of veg. And at the on the producer end of it, at the first vegetable summit, one of the things they announced was having a Veg Cities initiative as part of the Sustainable Food Cities project that Sustain, the Soil Association and Food Matters run together. And that really inspired me about this vision of having growers growing around every city in the UK. And this is what's very much inspired the vision, or part of the vision for the Land Workers Alliance and Growing Communities vision. So the aim is to achieve over the next 10 or so years, having tasty, fresh and affordable fruit and vegetables for all, local produce to boost local economies, a decentralized supply system, which is the real central point of this presentation, viable livelihoods, satisfying and meaningful employment, and food connection and education. So, Growing Communities, as some of you might be familiar with, is a vegetable box scheme in Hackney in northeast London, and they supply about 1,200 vegetable boxes to customers around Hackney, and they get a lot of the vegetables either that they grow themselves on their urban and peri-urban farms. They've got a farm at Dagenham, and they've got various urban plots called the Patchwork Farm, which are really small urban plots. And then they also buy direct from organic growers in the peri-urban areas and also in the rural hinterland. And about probably 15 years ago, they started developing this idea of the food zones model, which was an idealized diagram of where we would be getting our food from. And one of the things I like about it is quite pragmatic. It's not saying that we're going to be able to get all of our produce from urban, peri-urban and rural areas, but it's saying that's where we want to aim to get the bulk of it from, and then supplement it with produce from the rest of the UK. And where we can't get it from the rest of the UK, we get it from Europe or further afield. But the proportions that you see, the percentages that you see there, are what they want to be aiming for. And they set this up informed by the proportions of where they were getting veg from, but this is more ambitious than what they were achieving at the time. So what we're aiming with the horticulture campaign is to have a set of suppliers around every city in the UK based on this. And this is where the Organic Growers Alliance and CSA network come in, because we really need to be working together to achieve this. And there are already a lot of existing growers around these areas. So I'm just going to talk you through a couple of examples of existing food zone systems that aren't growing communities. So one of them is Regather Sheffield, which you may also be familiar with. Can you sit down? Thanks. So I've just plotted these suppliers to Regather Sheffield out on the food zones model. So they're getting produce for their box schemes. I think they're doing about 650 veg boxes a week. And Regather is a community enterprise co-op. And the difference between them and growing communities is that they're also selling bread and dairy produce and more than just fruit and vegetables. But they're getting their produce from a blend of urban farms such as Future Greens, which is indoor salad production, and a couple of urban city farms at Healy City Farm and Wortley Hall, which is a walled garden in the estate of a big house, which is owned and managed by the council. And then a big group of suppliers for Regather Sheffield are the Sheffield Organic Growers, as well as Regather's own farm, which that label is actually, there should be Regather down there right next to Sheffield Organic Growers. And then what they can't get from there, they're getting from further afield. So Polybell Farm and the Organic Pantry are both quite large scale producers in the north of England. And then they're supplementing that with produce from Organic North, a local wholesalers, where they can get produce that can't be grown in the UK. So just to show that the food zone system doesn't just have to be limited to cities, I've been trying to do a little bit of mapping of how it works and gathering case studies of food zones models this summer. And due to other things, I haven't managed to get that far. But one of them I have done is Frome Food Hub, who are a food hub in Frome, and they're on a much smaller scale, really just doing about 35 boxes per week, although it did go up to 100 in lockdown. And they're getting quite a lot of their produce from Vallis Veg, who's about 1.5 miles away from Frome Centre. And then they're getting some from Root Connections, which is up quite near Bath, I think, and Moonacre Farm. And then a lot of their larger scale crops they're getting from the community farm, either grown at the community farm in Chew Magna near Bristol, or the community farm actually acts as a sort of clearinghouse and wholesaler. So just to finish, why do we need more farms around cities? I mean, cities are close to people, and people are a potentially really large market for all the veg. This is not just about food miles, though, and reducing food miles, but it's actually, I think, more powerfully about the general public accessing farms, having access to green space and nature. Peri-urban vegetable farms and urban ones, they're much closer to cities for schools to visit, for public engagement activities, open days. And really, so many people are so disconnected these days with the way fruit and vegetables are produced and with seasonality. And one of the things I've been learning from running the growing goods test and trial is just how powerful the supermarkets are in actually driving a lot of the poor environmental practice in the mainstream production. A lot of the growers realized that it would be better not to be using so many pesticides, so many fossil fuels, to be cultivating so much, but they're kind of stuck in this way if they're selling to the supermarkets. And I think if we can get, whereas by contrast, these food zone supply systems where people are buying vegetable boxes they're actually supporting organic produce and all that that stands for. And so they're more tolerant of blemished produce. They understand about seasonality and the kind of things that drive waste, for example, large-scale growers to grow 3 times as much as they need, just in case they get a hailstorm or a pest attack, so that they can meet their contract. When you're selling via these peri-urban systems, that actually, and these food zone systems, that actually spreads the risk, and you've got different people feeding in. So I think you've got a much more resilient base supported by customers that actually really want this kind of produce. And I think as more and more people realize the connections, I hope that they will want to support these things. And I just don't believe they can do that through the supermarkets. So there are also significant benefits to people who come and visit these farms, particularly on a regular basis for volunteering, to physical, mental, and dietary health. I've actually got, well, that's on the next slide, but a lot of, as you're probably aware, a lot of people struggle with loneliness and disconnection, and going and volunteering on a regular basis at your local farm is a way of really becoming part of a community that's connected to the locality. And I think that this is going to be of growing importance. I mean, already we've got mental health epidemics, we've got diabetes, we've got obesity, and getting more people out to farms can only be a good thing, and hopefully will save the NHS money in the long term if people become healthier. So yes, there's a lot of evidence about the health benefits of peri-urban farming in the United States, but it's not that well documented in the UK. But there is an MSc student who's doing their dissertation on the benefits of volunteering. And they've been studying Sutton Community Farm in Surrey and the Wolves Lane Centre in Wood Green, and building on those existing studies. And I'd hoped to have got the finished dissertation before this, but the early findings suggest that there are higher well-being scores and lower anxiety than the average for England, that volunteers value being part of food growing projects that they consider being worthwhile, and that they really enjoy being outside and reconnecting with nature and being part of a team. So I think that this is really the time to join the dots. The Sustainable Food Places project has now been going for about at least 10, 15, maybe even 20 years. And they've got really established local food partnerships in most cities around the UK, but they're not so well connected a lot of the time with organic growers. And I think now is the time when we need to come together with them to say, look, we've got both the supply of fruit and vegetables and the skills that we can be sharing more broadly. We need to be really growing the growers of the future. And I think we're going to rely on a lot of the existing growers to help grow new growers who then have the confidence and ability to set up successful enterprises. And it's quite a specialist skill, because when you work on a peri-urban farm, you're not just growing vegetables, but you've actually got to have very good social skills and public engagement skills. And so one of the things that I think we need to be doing to grow this base of urban and peri-urban farms is training people up to have that combination of skills, and also having the funding so that people can not feel overstretched by trying to run a veg growing business, which is challenging in itself, but by having people who can also do the outreach and take the pressure off the growers. So yes, I think that's that. I will hand over to Aryo to explain more about fringe farming.
Right, great. Thank you, B. So I will try to keep this short because actually the main part comes afterwards, and I've had to improvise a little bit just because I wasn't expecting to be in this kind of room. So I thought it'd be a room where we could do some breakout groups, but obviously in this room it's a bit difficult. So yeah, I'll talk more about that bit and when we get there. But for now, let me just introduce you to the Fringe Farming project. So this is what I am leading in my work at Sustain, and so it's a collaborative project. Oh, by the way, Sustain is a food and farming. Okay, sure. Sustain is a food and farming charity. In case you're not familiar with them. And so it's really a collaborative project with 5 city partners. So Regather, Bede's already mentioned them in Sheffield. There's Food Sense Wales in Cardiff, Capital Growth, which is in London, Bristol Food Producers, obviously in Bristol, Glasgow Community Food Network in Glasgow, and our 2 national partners are Shared Assets and Landworks Alliance, which is where B comes in. And the picture there is Abby. She's one of our Glasgow partners. Okay, so just to outline what's happened, or what the Fringe Farming Project's all about, what our objectives are. So it's kind of going on from what B has said in terms of increasing access to fruit and vegetables up and down UK, and kind of building local food infrastructure. So very much kind of a localized food perspective. And yeah, I've got a stat up there just to show why it's so important. But I think everyone here is familiar why we need more fruit and vegetables for the public. And then in terms of building, why peri-urban specifically is important. Yeah, it's kind of building, so like what I've got here is building connection between urban and rural areas. So it's kind of a gray area, peri-urban. It's not quite rural, it's not quite urban. And that kind of makes it quite exciting in the sense that it has the potential to be more rural or more urban. And so you get kind of a dynamic characteristic of the peri-urban. And obviously the trend is much more towards peri-urban becoming more urban as you get kind of this urban sprawl. But with a project like this, we can kind of counter that in some ways to make kind of bring in more rural activities into the peri-urban. Yeah, and then the stat I got down there about how easy, in a sense, in terms of land area, it would be to meet our national demands. Yeah, just because I love numbers. So and to plug in a blog I just wrote. So this is all about why peri-urban is so important. And so here, I'll just read it out loud. So converting 1% of peri-urban land to agroecological market gardening would lead to 530,000 tons of fruit and vegetables, or £3 billion in value of production, and 160,000 FT, full-time equivalent jobs. And this is based on data from Organically, which are kind of our model peri-urban farm in London. And then trying to, also the idea of what counts as peri-urban is a bit gray and floppy. So I got my numbers from a report from CPRE, the countryside charity. But yeah, that obviously it depends on how you define it. We can go more into that, but it's basically CPRE. They define it by 5K area within populations of 100,000 or more people. Also, something I haven't really talked about is why do we talk about agroecological? Well, obviously, we're an organic conference. And I think you'll get agroecology, so I'm not going to explain what it is, but just to say that there is a lot of crossover. And I think if you're organic, not necessarily agroecological, but if you're organic, you tend to be agroecological. So you are practicing environmental aware practices, and farms tend to be small scale and diversified, also labor intensive in general. And on top of that, I think organic farms tend to be more engaged with local communities and kind of build on social enterprise. So I think these are all quite strong features of agroecological farms as well. So what's been happening in the project? Okay, so year one, this was kind of working with all the 5 city partners. Actually, at the time, there were only 4 cities, so there wasn't Cardiff in the first year. So we were together forming action plans for each city. And then we had the practitioners forum, which B came into in year 2. She's kind of heading that part of the project. And there's also this idea of kind of joining the dots. So all the different elements that are needed to make a peri-urban farm successful. How do you connect the dots with that? And then year 2, which is the year that we're in right now. So this engaging with the local action plans, so putting them into action. And then kind of working more at the national policy level. So we had an event, for example, in June this year, where we had a kind of roundtable discussion with peers and MPs and also an MS from Cardiff as well, and just getting them familiar with our project and seeing how much support they had for what we were doing. And it went well. It was definitely an interesting discussion. And yeah, so the real kind of work is how do we continue with that? And so that's year 3 is a question mark because our funding finishes in February. So we're not really sure what year 3 would look like, if it exists at all. But at least in my mind, it would be really good to kind of forge these political alliances that we've started creating this year. And then to lobby actions, so to trying to make it more of a campaign, you know, especially at a national level. And then also the focus on devolved nations is important. I think even though we have a Glasgow and Cardiff partner, we don't have a Northern Ireland partner, but still, I think this focus, I mean, the project itself is quite England-centric and quite London or Westminster-centric. So it would be good to understand how, relatively speaking, fringe farming can do in the other devolved nations. Okay, and so just to give some context, I think I won't go into this too much because it's quite obvious, but with all these different crises we're having and challenges, so things like public health, the climate emergency, cost of living crisis, but also just to highlight the lack of diversity in farming. So farmers tend to be very old. It's a very aging sector. And so the thing with peri-urban farming, because it's so close to the urban centers, which are the most diverse, especially ethnically and maybe in terms of sexual orientation, as well as age and gender. So trying to get these people, well, not trying to, but at least the idea is that it would be more likely these people would enter farming should it be available in peri-urban spaces. And then what I've already mentioned before in terms of land competition, peri-urban land is very open to land speculation and development. So trying to kind of somehow balance that out with the need for food production, as well as the rural form of economy. And so our key asks, which we kind of lobby, and this is very much a summary. So there's a report and also a policy briefing, which is linked to this presentation. But just to summarize it in a very quick way, our key ask is that we need like an integrated package, particularly for new entrants, people who want to get into peri-urban farming, but also people who are already in peri-urban farming who need support. And we need to set them up to succeed, not to fail. So if you, for example, you have the land, you have the skills, but you don't have the route to market, you're set up to fail. So it's really, you need to consider all these things in an integrated way. And the second thing is much more focused on kind of the local level. And this is to get local authorities to maintain and expand land access, as well as other public institutions. So it could be schools or even NHS and universities as well. But obviously it's more private. But the trend is for land to be sold off by councils as they need to stay afloat, as you know they're very much underfunded by national government. So trying to reverse this trend really. And other things that are happening at national level, which obviously, given the current climate, is very unsure about. But anyway, the new entrant support scheme. So this is in a pilot stage at the moment, but this is from DEFRA, and this is really geared towards getting, especially young people, but new people into farming, and how to support them, which is something we're very much want to see more of. And then the ELMS, environmental land management schemes. How can we use this to our advantage as well? And then the other two, which perhaps would be less obvious, are kind of net zero, the commitment of government to net zero, and also leveling up. So how does farming especially in a kind of agroecological way, so I kind of environmentally and socially conscious way, how can it contribute to the climate targets or the carbon targets, and also targeting impoverished communities. Yeah, so as I mentioned, we do have resources on our website. So if you go to sustainweb.org/fringe farming, there are things like our national policy recommendations in full, so much longer than I've already spoken about, and as well as the policy briefings. This is something you could bring to your local council, your local MP or whoever. And okay, so the next part is the bit where I am going to be quite unprofessional and improvise. So I'm going to ask, are there any peri-urban farmers? I know there's at least 2 in the room. Yeah, 3. Yeah. Well, let's keep it a bit vague. So at least outside, so close enough that you are connected to a city, but not within the city. Yeah. Okay, great. Would you mind coming up and kind of sitting in a panel form, just to put you in the spotlight? Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Just two, is it?
It looks like it now. You and me.
No, I think
That's Martin, yeah.
Start to get on, days.
Yeah, we would have had a kind of breakout group. Also realized there aren't that many peri-urban farmers, so it kind of doesn't make too much sense to have a breakout group anyway. So yeah, so this way you get to pitch questions to the panel, but I'll also start off with the questions I've already got here. So yeah, maybe I'll go one by one. Just what problems or barriers have you faced, and what have you done to overcome them? And these could be related to land, for example, just to give you prompts: land, resources, skills, and market in terms of barriers. So Helen, could I go with you first?
Yeah. So what barriers?
And then one second go how you go.
Do you want to go back to the question?
Yeah, sure.
That's quite difficult because I'm part of an organisation, so it's not my business, and we sort of started farming on a site that was already, well, it was council owned. It is still council owned, the land, but it was their council nursery, and it had sort of been disbanded and gone into a bit of disrepair. They'd taken all the massive greenhouses out. So the benefits were that we had already some infrastructure. So we had water. There was a cabin, which I think they actually provided when we first started there. So some sort of, we have electricity. So that sort of infrastructure was a real benefit.
Is it worth saying where you are and what?
Yes, we're in Stockport, sorry. So the organisation is the Kindling Trust. I'm Farm Start Coordinator, so we manage a commercial growing site there, but it's a food hub that also has a community growing project, and we have a sort of fruit tree project going on there now. So it manages more than just a commercial growing site, basically. And it's set within a public park. So I would say the benefit of that is that it's quite protective. It's already fenced. It's surrounded by houses on 2 sides, park on the other 2 sides. That can also make it vulnerable to some extent to activity at night, although we've been very, very lucky with that. I think the challenges are, I think, not really related to being fringe operation. It's actually just the same challenges that other operations of our size face. I don't know you guys might be able to sort of think of something that the benefits have been are enormous, and we have access to you know, a network, I would say, of local growers like Dan, and also Unicorn Grocery, and a business that was already set up by Kindling, which is a big veg box scheme, Manchester-wide veg box scheme, although we don't actually at the moment use Organic North, but we're thinking of signing up to Organic North. You know, there are those networks are already there, and you know, I can think of lots of challenges if you want. Endless list, which I can write down for you.
Yeah, my name's Dan. I suppose quick, brief history. I took on Cleveland's, used to be Cleveland's Growers, now Cleveland's Organic Produce. Start 2021, after doing just one season working with the previous owners there. And that was the first full season I've done growing. So it was quite a fast track entrance into the world of growing veg organically. And we currently sell to Unicorn Grocery. I think they're probably our biggest customer, which is organic green grocers in Chorlton, South Manchester. We sell to veg box people who run by the Kindling Trust, and Organic North. Those are our three main customers. We do a few like small restaurants and small box stores and stuff like that. So I suppose most of the sort of big hurdles in terms of getting into it have already been overcome by the time I took the business on. But I think the thing that I suppose the biggest hurdle I've sort of found is probably finding staff. I've been quite lucky with it, I think. The first year, we were right in the middle of the pandemic, and everybody and his dog was looking for something new to get into. And I literally had, when I put the advert out, I probably had 30 people get in touch for 2 seasonal worker jobs. And then the second year, I had about 3. Luckily, one person, Georgie's here, she came from Farm Start, and she'd been doing volunteering with us before anyway. So we knew she was good, and we got her on board, and then we got Tom. But like one of the staff from last year as well, he's travelling quite a long way to get here. He's doing like probably an hour and a half commute every day. At least an hour there, and yeah, a couple of hours, an hour there and an hour back. You know, so sort of. But I think the thing for me is and it's something I'm a little bit concerned about for going into next year, is especially considering like everybody's left now, is finding good staff locally. That's quite a thing. That luckily we have got the Farm Start program who Helen works for, and that's quite a good thing. I think in terms of ways of overcoming it, something I've always done from the word go is, and that's how George got involved, is kind of having a work experience program. And it's quite a hard thing to sort of dictate to people exactly how much time, if they're working for free, you've got to work these amount of hours. But I try and make it something whereby it's like, if you come down and you want to get involved in that, you will be treated like a normal member of staff, and you will be expected to, work to sort of, obviously allowing a little bit for the fact that they probably haven't done it for very long or never worked on a farm before, but try and incorporate them into the whole thing as much as a normal member of staff would, so yeah, and that's obviously, like I say, we've got George through that. I'm going to continue doing that, but also I think something we've never really done, and the previous owners didn't do much of, is having like a volunteer program, just inviting people down to just get involved. I think I certainly think from the previous owner's point of view, and I sort of agree with it as well, is that obviously takes time away from somebody within the business to look after volunteers, and it's like, is that is that a worthwhile exercise, or is it just better to not have someone look up to volunteers, just get on with what needs to happen? I'm actually taking some time. Normally we grow salad all winter, but having had a couple of really hard years jumping in at the deep end, I'm actually taking a break this winter to have a think about these sort of things, you know, take a bit of break. So I think just having volunteers, getting people from the community involved in what's going on, might sort of, you know, inspire people to get involved in the sort of thing we do, you know. So yeah.
I'm fortunate. I am fortunate enough to have inherited a farm, which is right. So mine is Martin from Shinford Organics. We're right on the edge of Exeter, and the land we farm is really good for growing vegetables all year round. So we're incredibly lucky. We've been going for 20 years, so I guess we're quite well known. So the people apply to us for work. So the staffing thing isn't such a problem at the moment. And we're really fortunate also that a new apprenticeship scheme was started at the Apricot Centre in Dartington, which is quite near us. And they do a level 3 apprenticeship scheme in regenerative farming. It's not horticulture, but horticulture is an aspect of it. And actually we're taking on, so we had 2 apprentices last year. We're going to take 2 apprentices on this year. We pay them a stipend, they live on the farm. But we're going to take on one of the apprentices this year, who was a trainee last year, who was training this year, take her on next year. So we have 7 growers plus 2 apprentices and myself, and 2 people in the pack house team. So our barrier isn't staff, it isn't land. Our barrier is completely opposite to you, it's access to market, because Exeter is a city of 135,000, it's probably one of the fastest growing cities. Houses keep appearing every day, nearer and nearer to us. And you think it'd be really easy to sell produce. But nowhere in Exeter, well, with the exception of little tiny shops that sell nothing, no retail outlet, sorry, none of the retail outlets, because the retail market is so dominated by 9 multiple retailers, who actually 96% of all sales goes through the 9 dominant multiple retailers. That means all the retail outlets in Exeter are dominated by multiple retailers who will not buy any local food, wouldn't even look at us. So where do we sell our produce? We do a box scheme, an online shop. We do the farmers market, an Exeter farmers market. Are there any city councillors from Exeter City? No. Actually, it's very hopeless. It really is poor. It's on a Thursday between 9 and 2. Most people can't get to it. So the aim would be to have a shop of our own. And I think in the right community, in the right district of a city, but that isn't easy in itself. It's a huge undertaking. It's another business to run. And one of the guys on the farm was really keen to do it, but it's not easy to do. So you're lucky to have the unicorn.
Yeah,
I mean, what an amazing outlet that is. If we had one of those, we'd be able to grow so much more produce. So that's our biggest barrier. So the Export Centre do this apprenticeship scheme, which is great. I mean, Riverford are just 20 miles from us, so a lot of growers in South Devon grow for Riverford, which is fantastic. So it's a fantastic outlet for them. So that, I mean, Riverford are a great example, although it's on a different scale. It's not really peri-urban. Well, so what is
There's
changed?
also a question from the audience.
So,
Just a question. Okay.
I hope you can hear me. Sorry.
Hello, can you hear me? What about the food hub model where you could sell into a food hub that's online where it's managed by, I think the Apricot Center has a food hub at the Apricot Center where they're sourcing veggies from within, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 miles. Would that open up a market for you? Have you ever tried selling into one of those? I know there's a couple in the area. I live at Dartington as well. So, but
So, yeah, I definitely think, in fact, the Exeter Food Park, what's it called? The Sustainable Cities had a report commissioned, and the report was done by Andy Johnson, who was here earlier. It just looked at what 20%, if we could sell 20% of the food into Exeter as local and organic, what would it look like? And it's interesting that your statistics, the 5% and the 15%, 5% urban, the 15% peri-urban, is 20%, isn't it?
Mhm.
So, and it's very doable, especially in an area like south where we are, because there's some really good land around the area, and it's very easy. And the figures, I can't remember the figures, but it was very doable, just from a land point of view and a production point of view. But the food hub would be a fantastic thing, but it's getting that food hub set up, because the biggest problem to set up a food hub is to find the markets where it's a chicken and egg situation. We can't promise the university or hospital, other shops or other restaurants that we're going to have this local supply until we've got the market established, and then we can't tell the growers to grow it until we've got the market established. So we're stuck in this sort of dilemma at the moment of we haven't got it set up. So we need a huge amount of funding. That would be, or just a reasonable amount of funding to get it set up and take a punt on it. So yeah, absolutely. I think the American food hub concept, or the grow communities, what they do, better suited. Although they've got a market, they've got the box schemes they supply. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's been built up over many years. Growing communities has been going for over 20 years now.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't think any of these things start out with that many customers. So I think if you were to start it with what's available and try and build it up.
Yeah.
And we had quite a good, one of the things I didn't mention in my talk was the Peri-Urban Practitioners Forum, which somebody else was running last year, but I'm running this year as part of Fringe Farming. And on that, we have quarterly meetings, either online or in person, to address key issues. And we had one at the Land Skills Fair in the summer, and that was where this whole issue of marketing being a barrier came up. So we actually had the next one, which was online, was focusing on accessing urban markets. And we had somebody from Tamar agroecological, or Tamar Food Hub, and someone from Pennine Crop Share. And both of them, and in fact, with the Tamar Food Hub, they were talking about this sort of circuit, which seemed to include Exeter. So that's it, the food loop. So I think it's very doable. And they were also talking about having allies like the Plymouth University Sustainability Centre, where they drop off. So,
well, yeah, the university, because Exeter University is big, and they've got a big environmental sustainability branch too.
And that would be a really good place to sort of tap into.
Yeah, it would be, yeah.
I think following that phrase of grow trees where they want to grow, try and sell organic vegetables to people who want organic vegetables first, and then branch out from there.
Yeah. But so just I think the local and national, I really don't think that our city councils, I don't know if you guys are saying, but I don't think they understand anything about food. So I think
that's what we
trying to get the message across.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about that actually. That point specifically was what in the past have you done to approach local councils, and how much success have you had? And so obviously you haven't had success.
No.
By the review.
Kindling were already involved with Stockport Council in terms of because they were doing they were a sustainable city and or part of that whole program, and so they actually approached us and said, do you want, you know, to be based at this site? So that was obviously, I mean, they have been, they are incredibly supportive, but they also get a massive amount of kudos from us being there and doing what we do. And it can also take quite a lot of work to sort of, you know, get long-term things out of them. But
and then in a way that kudos needs to be turned around into positive, because
exactly, yeah.
You kind of
we
want
use it, believe me.
Yes, good.
But yeah, it's,
So I think trying to avoid reinventing the wheel and using the Sustainable Food Places network, where they've forged all of those partnerships already, rather than trying to reinvent it, is a really valuable thing to do.
Yeah, and also another question would be kind of at the national level, are there policy mechanisms that you see that you would want to maneuver, but you know, that you could use? Is there anything in your own work like that someone like Sustain could lobby for?
Do I know anything about national?
No, are there specific policy mechanisms on national scale that you would you know, feel are important to you?
I don't think it's just, surely the target net zero must include food miles, but it doesn't seem to, it seems to be out of the equation. And it's just really interesting that the previous Trade Secretary, Liz Truss, after Brexit, negotiated a deal with Morocco to import vegetables from Morocco and set up a ferry, a roll-on, roll-off ferry to Poole Harbour to bring Moroccan vegetables in to replace the vegetables from Spain, because they were more difficult to the EU restriction. And but that the government would, and that's importing stuff that we grow in this country. Most of the vegetables that we grow in this country, 50% of them actually, well, 50% of them are carrots and onions, because we're very good at growing carrots and onions. And that's not including potatoes, don't count. Well, potatoes, carrots, and onions, we grow a lot of, but all of the green broccolis and cauliflowers. I mean, I don't, what Andy was saying earlier in one of the talks is that the price of these green vegetables has gone up by, the wholesale price has gone up by over 100% in the last year. Whereas carrots and onions haven't gone up because we grow a lot of them in this country. So that from a food security point of view, why isn't it on the political agenda?
Well, we've got this chance now with the horticulture strategy for England, and we need to be really making sure that we make sure that the horticulture strategy is about building resilience for UK grown vegetables and and addressing this whole ridiculous notion that we can rely on imported vegetables more rather than less.
The area of vegetables grown from the Henry Dimble report, area of vegetables, that's the same as amount of golf courses.
Stop there. Get him off.
But we also need more growers as well.
We do.
Yes.
I mean, it's one of these problems that you can't just address one bit of it.
Exactly.
That's why with this horticulture renewal program, we need to be doing everything from getting people trained up and set up and established with the land and the capital to do it. And one of the things that I think we can do quite effectively is playing off the different devolved nations against each other. Because, for example, the Welsh government introduced this horticulture development grant and new entrant startup grant this year, which is a lot better than the farm technology grants that we've got in England, because you can buy second-hand equipment with it. And so I think by pointing out to DEFRA that they've got this in Wales and why can't we have that in England, I think we can use that to our advantage if it's actually working. I mean, there were flaws in the Welsh one because they introduced it in May when all growers were so busy with the growth season that they didn't have time to apply. But I think they're going to do it again, and that was one of the bits of feedback that's given out.
Are there any comments or questions from the audience, especially about, I don't know, getting new entrants into farming or policy at national or local level? Yes, one.
Yeah, Ulrich, Coventry University. I'm a bit into agroforestry, and I wanted to ask you how much you mentioned the trees already in Kindling Trust, the apple trees. So how much is that part of the urban fringe, adding trees, agroforestry? Just the three of us.
Part of a sort of staged approach at Kindling are basically looking to buy a farm. So that will be more actually peri-urban than our site, which is sort of really urban in a way. So that, yeah, we're looking for sort of a 200-acre farm. We've done a shares campaign where we raised a lot of money to buy the farm, and it will be based on agroforestry methods, and the trees that we've been grafting are all, I think about, well, the aim was 12,000, and I think we've done more than that now. 6,000 of those have gone out to local communities. That's all been done through training and workshops, and the other trees have been put, they are peri-urbanly out at the moment in another site that will then go to the farm when we found a farm. A couple of farms have fallen through, so still looking for that. So that's, yeah, part of the future, basically.
I think one of the problems with a lot of rental sites is that agroforestry is such a long-term thing. And I mean, I think it's really clever the way Kindling have grown the trees and grafted them. So you've managed to build up the stock of trees in a very low-cost way. But for buying fruit trees, it's a big, big investment. And if you don't know that you're going to be able to secure the site long-term, and a lot of peri-urban sites are rented, because a lot of landowners are unwilling to sell because of the hope value on the land.
Yeah.
So I think that's quite a big barrier to agroforestry. There's a question at the back.
Is there a question about new entrants?
Yeah.
Sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't quite hear.
Well, there was a short discussion. We were just saying how to get new entrants into farming, and yeah, if anyone has any ideas or questions, even.
I genuinely think the industry itself right now, you talked about the average age of a farmer. I think there's an emphasis on the industry to train up the next generation. I think if we hang around waiting for the government to set up a big horticultural school, every time there's an election, it will come and it will go, it will come and it will go. I train apprentices on my farm, and I have to say they are the best staff you can have. They don't just come for a wage, they come for a wage and to learn and a thirst for knowledge. And I find them the best staff you can possibly have. And I would massively encourage any commercial grower to look at that route rather than just trying to recruit. I think if you train your staff in the way you want them, funnily enough, our apprenticeship program is throughput. So they're there for 3 years and then they leave. So the idea is to put young entrants, train new entrants into the industry, but there's no reason, you can do it. It can be totally commercially sensible to take on a new entrant and train them up. And it's a very symbiotic working relationship. I think it's the best staff you can have. Yeah.
No, I agree. Yeah.
There's also a question right at the back.
Hi, I'm Mick Marston. I'm come from Gibbside Community Farm, which is a peri-urban farm in Gateshead. And I just want to say about agroforestry, we managed to get a field from National Trust on a farm business tenancy. So don't forget the National Trust, they're one of the largest landowners, and we got 25-year farm business tenancy at very competitive rates. And we designed the site purely on the basis of planting trees. So we planted a couple of thousand trees, and that's the framework for which the farm's planned. So all these things are possible, even with a blank field.
Yeah.
So do you think, I don't know if you heard of this apprenticeship scheme in Aryo, the regenerative farming apprenticeship scheme, but basically it's the apprentices spend 4 days on a farm and 1 day a week throughout the whole year at a college learning theory. Would you say that would you say that your model is as good as or better than, or would you suggest that this that concept. So they get a level 3 certificate when they finish.
Yeah, I think we essentially, the one we run, Martin, is off the back of the old Soil Association apprenticeship, and that faded across the country. We were the only place left doing it. I've been keeping my eye out for the theoretical match. So essentially the certificate, because mine is just experience. We do theory sessions. There's no certificates. It's just knowledge you leave with, and confidence is the key bit. But I think we've only just started to see industry relevant theory being offered by colleges and Apricot Centre. I think is Brighton University, I think, is starting up a relevant qualification. I think there's somewhere in Wales, in Lampeter, that is starting up a relevant qualification. Plumpton. Before that, it was your choice was RHS level 2.
Yeah.
Essentially, or agriculture, agriculture university, neither of which filled this. But I've just seen, like I said, there's 3 places now. So I think that is really powerful and really important. And we haven't got anyone near it at the moment, but we'd definitely be signing ours up to a similar thing if there was a relevant place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The more teachers, the better.
Yeah.
I'm being told we have to draw to a close. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, let me thank the panel. I mean, put you on the spot. So yeah, it's amazing that you came out. Thank you.